Are you on witness reciprocity?
Look, I think the president has the right to call relevant witnesses, just as we do. In his defense, he doesn't have the right to call irrelevant witnesses or witnesses who aren't fact witnesses.
Well, if the Senate says he does, why not? Then, I mean, that's the way the rules work. I mean, I understand where you come from, but if the Senate says he can, then he can.
Well, the Senate can make whatever decision the Senate can make, and the American people can judge that decision. But if we're talking about a fair trial, if the senators are going to give content to their oath to be impartial administrators of justice, they can't say, well, we're going to allow the president to trade witnesses that don't shed any light on the facts, but would allow him to once again try to smear his opponent. We're going to make that the pound of flesh. We're going to make that the cost of calling relevant witnesses.
If they're irrelevant, what are you afraid of? Won't that be exposed?
Well, it's not a question of what I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of anything.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, should the trial be used as a vehicle to smear his opponent? Is that the purpose of a Senate trial, or is it to get to the truth? Because if it's to get to the truth, Hunter Biden can't tell us anything about the withholding of the military funding. Hunter Biden can't tell us why the president wouldn't let the president of Ukraine into the Oval Office. Hunter Biden can't tell us anything about that. And so, you know, it's a false choice to say, well, if the House gets to call witnesses, doesn't the president? Yes, we both get to call witnesses. We both get to call relevant ones.
This is Adam Schiff laying out perfectly the flawed rationale behind Republican efforts to call Hunter Biden to testify in Trump's impeachment trial. Now, to be clear, the issue isn't that they can't. Senators have the right to call whoever they want. The point here is why they're doing it. Republicans know that they can't argue the merits of this case on Trump's behalf. It is as clear as day that Trump extorted a foreign country for dirt on a political opponent and then orchestrated a large-scale cover-up to prevent anyone from finding out. That much is beyond dispute. What they're relying on is equating Trump's illegal behavior with the conspiracy theory that the Bidens were somehow also at fault. Now, to be clear, this is a false equivalency. The issue of Hunter and Joe Biden is already widely debunked, and yet the fact that the GOP is so desperate to keep giving these bad faith conspiracy theories oxygen has nothing to do with Hunter Biden and everything to do with their own desperation in having to defend Donald Trump. So yet again, here's why calling Hunter or Joe Biden is destined to be a monumental failure for the right. A, Joe Biden was correct in advocating for the ouster of corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor Viktor Shokin. Ousting him was a priority of the entire West, of the US government, the EU, the IMF, anti-corruption advocates in Ukraine, and even Senate Republicans. B, Shokin was not investigating Burisma, the company that Hunter Biden served on the board of, and in fact, a new prosecutor would have increased the likelihood of scrutiny on Burisma. And C, Hunter Biden's service on the Burisma board took place 2 years after the alleged corruption took place. In other words, Trump can pretend that he had no choice but to root out this grave example of corruption, but the facts of the case in no way support his story. And beyond that, let's not actually pretend that Trump cared about corruption in Ukraine. I know Republicans are praising him as some anti-corruption crusader, but there literally isn't one single example of the guy rooting out corruption before now. You don't get to call yourself a champion of rooting out corruption if you've never actually done anything to root out corruption before. And if you really believe that the one instance that he finally found to do so was in Eastern Europe and just so happened to involve his top polling political rival heading into the next election, then I've got a bridge to sell you. There's also the minor issue that the only people willing to go on record about his supposed anti-corruption effort were people like Gordon Sondland, who testified under oath that Trump didn't actually care about the investigation into Biden, but rather just wanted the announcement of the probe into Biden.
But he had to get those two investigations if that official act was going to take place, correct?
He had to announce the investigations. He didn't actually have to do them, as I understood it.
In other words, it wasn't justice he was seeking, it was a soundbite for his next campaign ad. Of course, Trump and his associates are welcome to also testify and refute these claims under oath, but they won't. Not only that, the White House has actually blocked its officials from testifying in the Senate, and that should tell you everything you need to know about who's telling the truth and who's not. So I get that Republicans are hell-bent on distracting the American people, on obfuscating the facts and diverting our attention every which way, but let's not lose sight of the actual purpose of this trial, and that is to determine whether to convict the President of the United States for withholding military assistance for an ally at war with Russia, for trying to use that aid as a bribe to exact dirt on a political opponent, for anointing Rudy Giuliani to serve as a shadow State Department to destroy the reputation of that opponent and remove ambassadors hackers who stood in the way, for hiding the summary of the call in a secure server, and for blocking the testimony of officials who knew about the scheme. As much as the White House would like to pretend that all of this was the fault of Hunter Biden or anyone else, in reality, the responsibility of those actions lies solely with Donald Trump, and he is the only one on trial here.